Hello, Honor Seminar students. This is a lecture in an online class. Some of our lectures will be during our meetings on Wednesdays, but this one is pre-recorded. It is a PowerPoint presentation that was made into a video, which is one of the tricks I learned this year. Our topic is interpersonal ethics, which is the theme for this semester, and we will also go over some useful concepts for week one. First, ethical versus empirical issues. An ethical issue is a matter of morality, of right and wrong. An empirical issue is a matter of fact and is testable through experiment, observation, or data collection. This is a pretty simple distinction, but we'll see that sometimes the two get mixed up. Ethical and empirical issues are often combined. And here's two examples. Do I have a right to cross the border? Well, if you mean, do I have a moral right to cross the border, then it's an ethical issue. But if your question is about the law, do I have a legal right to cross the border? That's an empirical issue because you need facts. You need to look up the law. Next example, should marijuana be legalized? If you mean, would it be right or wrong to legalize marijuana, right or wrong morally, then it's ethical. If you mean, what would be the effects, or is this a good policy decision in terms of its consequences, then you're talking about an empirical issue. So for both of these, you have an issue that people might disagree on, and there's ethical and empirical issues mixed together. Ethical or empirical? Example A. Do police often racially profile in their efforts to stop crime? This question is empirical. In order to find out whether they do this often, you need facts, you need data, you need some sort of research. Example B, do police have a moral right to racially profile in their efforts to stop crime? This is an ethical question because any question of moral rights is ethical. So you can see that A and B are related, but A is empirical and B is ethical. Example C, is racial profiling a problem? Is unclear. It's not clear what you mean. If you mean, does it happen a lot? Or does it have very bad effects? That's an empirical question. If you mean, is racial profiling morally wrong? Then it's an ethical question. So when you see questions like example C, remember, oftentimes the ethical and empirical questions are mixed together. Ethical or empirical? What would happen if we legalized all recreational drugs? This is an empirical question. If you're trying to predict the future and the effects of some action, you're asking an empirical question. B, if one takes heroin, is one doing something immoral, or is it just unwise and possibly dangerous? This is an ethical question because it's asking about the morality of taking heroin. C, should drugs such as heroin and cocaine be legalized? This question is both. It's partly the moral question of whether it would be morally right to legalize those drugs, but it also involves empirical questions such as what would the effects be of this legalization? So again, for an example like C, often the ethical and empirical issues are mixed together. Is this argument mainly ethical or empirical? So here we have a little more of a complex example. And this is about an argument by Carrie Jenkins. a philosophy professor at the University of British Columbia, who has become a reluctant defender of polyamory. Polyamory, more or less, is the idea that we should have more than one romantic or sexual partner at the same time. Jenkins, whose new book is called What Love Is and What It Could Be, says our concept of romantic love is too narrow, too exclusive, too mononormative. Then we have a quote from Jenkins. I want you to study this quote and decide whether you think her argument is mainly ethical or mainly empirical. So at this point, I want you to pause your video, click pause, study the quote, read it 2 or 3 times, think about whether you think it's mainly ethical or empirical. Go ahead and pause your video now so you can study the quote. This argument looks like an ethical argument, but I'm going to argue that it's mainly empirical. It seems like an ethical argument because Jenkins is saying that compulsory heterosexuality, that monogamy, that it's wrong to make people do certain things, that it's morally wrong, it seems like she's saying, to put people in a box. So it's an ethical argument because it's saying we shouldn't put people in boxes and make them all do the same thing. However, if you look more closely, I think it's mainly an empirical argument because she's arguing that it's unhealthy. That is an empirical claim. If you're saying it's unhealthy to force people into a choice that might not fit them, if it's unhealthy to pressure people to be monogamous who might not want to be, that's an empirical claim. The claim that it's unhealthy would need to be backed up by facts. You would need some sort of research studies, some sort of data, some sort of empirical support for your claim that it's unhealthy. So I think mainly this argument is empirical because she's claiming that it's unhealthy to make everyone be monogamous. However, it does suggest an ethical argument about it being wrong morally to put people in boxes. So again, what we can see is that for a lot of issues that people might discuss, there's both ethical and empirical components involved. Of course, in Philosophy 122, we will focus on the ethical arguments. So sometimes part of the task is to separate the real ethical issues from empirical issues that are mixed in. Okay, now we're going to talk about the theme of interpersonal ethics, which is our theme for this semester in Philosophy 122. So, interpersonal ethics, as opposed to what? Here's a couple examples. A, is it morally permissible for the U.S. government to turn away migrants from Central America who say they are fleeing danger in their home countries? Example B, should people be allowed to carry concealed firearms on college campuses? C, should professors be allowed to drop students from their classes who have plagiarized a paper? Examples A, B, and C are all ethical questions. These are not empirical questions. They are definitely ethical. But they are not interpersonal ethics because they're not about people interacting with each other. Example A is about the U.S. government and what is right or wrong for the U.S. government to do. Same with example B. It's a matter of law and what law would be correct. So these are matters of policy and government. They are not interpersonal ethics. Example C is also policy, but it's about college. It might be a policy at LMC. But again, these examples are ethics, but they're not interpersonal ethics. So we will not focus on examples like this in this course. More examples. A, does the government have the right to tax wealthy people at a much higher rate? Again, this is ethical, but it's not interpersonal ethics. B, for very serious crimes such as murder, is the death penalty justified? C, in what cases is the use of tear gas against protesters morally permissible? Like the last slide, these are all ethical issues. They're not empirical issues. However, they are not interpersonal ethics because they are matters of government, matters of law, matters of policy. And so we will not focus on issues like these. These examples are different. These ones are interpersonal ethics. I'm not going to read them out loud, so take a moment, pause your video, and read these examples of interpersonal ethical issues. Go ahead. These are the kind of ethical issues that we will focus on this semester. They are all ethical, so they're not empirical questions. And they're all interpersonal ethics, having to do with people interacting with each other. In number 1, the Todd and Maria example, we have interpersonal ethics having to do with love, romantic relationships. For number 2, we have an example of interpersonal ethics having to do with family. And in number 3, we have interpersonal ethics that's more out in the world. So this is still an interaction between people, but it's out in public. It's at a store. All of these are the kinds of things that we're going to work on this semester in Philosophy 122.